I'd like to finish a thought that I left over from yesterday's lecture regarding Cain and Hevel, the first murder in the world. So the verse in the Torah, the pasuk is that God approaches approaches Cain rather, and he says, "Ayei Hevel achicha, where is your brother Hevel?" So the obvious thing here is that God is asking, so to speak, a rhetorical question, a question to which certainly the Ribono Shel Olam, who is omniscient, knows what happened here. But God is interested, so to speak, to hear the human reaction. What response does the murderer have to his behavior, to what he did? And Cain answers disingenuously. Cain answers, "Shomer ochi anochi lo yadati." I don't know. Am I responsible? So the basis for murder is the fact that I'm not responsible for anyone else. I'm not responsible for the life of another human being, and therefore I can answer, "Ashomer ochi anochi." Am I my brother's keeper? Do I have any liability, responsibility for what happens to anyone else? And if we'll think about it, I think that we'll realize that that is the basic justification for violence and abuse and murder and killing. All of the awful things that happen in the world happen on the basis of the fact that I really have no responsibility to anyone else. And because I have no responsibility to anyone else, after a while it becomes acceptable, and after becoming acceptable it becomes justified. The conversation continues. Kol dmei achicha tzoakim elai mino adoma. The blood of your brother shouts to me from the ground. So there are at least two important lessons here. One lesson that Chazal always emphasized to us is that sin is not an inanimate object, but that it has a life, so to speak, of its own. And therefore sin shouts. The Navi says, "Even mikir titzmach, kofish mitikra," that the stolen stone that you built into the wall shouts, "I am stolen, I am stolen." The stolen beam that was built into your roof continually shouts, "I am stolen, I am stolen." Meaning that the act has consequences. It remains forever. It doesn't disappear. And there are, so to speak, many sounds in the world, positive and negative, that are constantly here with us. The only thing is that we're not attuned to hear them. The frequency doesn't adjust to our ears. But that doesn't change the fact that the sound is here. So the sound of the first murder still reverberates in the world. Kol dmei achicha tzoakim elai mino adoma. And if we'll add to it, unfortunately, all of the millions and millions of other murders that have taken place, so we will realize that there is a cacophony of sound in the world. And that the Lord reacts, so to speak, to that sound. And that's a heavy burden to bear. And the second point in that conversation is that God uses the plural, demei achicha, the bloods, many bloods. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin teaches us, there are different interpretations as to why the plural was used, but one of the interpretations is that it's not only Hevel's blood that shouts, but it's all the potential that could have come from Hevel, the unborn generations, what the world could have had from him, his descendants, his children. All of that has been snuffed out as well. So the murderer is not just responsible for the one person who is murdered, the murderer is responsible for the fact that all of the generations of that person have also been eliminated. What shall we say, for instance? I mean, we are witness to it in our time, the Holocaust. It's not just the 6 million Jews that were killed, it's the fact that what's missing, there's a gaping hole in the Jewish world. What could have been? So one is responsible not only for the act, but one is responsible for the potential that the act also removed. And that's why this concept of shichus domim, of destroying human life, is held to be such a cardinal sin, because it destroys not only life, it destroys the potential for life as well. Now, the third area that I want to discuss is Gilui Aroyot, having to do with human sexuality. Now, we see in the end, we just finished reading the Chumash Bamidbar. The Chumash Bamidbar is a recounting of tragic events that occurred to the Jewish people in the desert. But there's there are different categories of the events. So if we'll stop to think for a minute, even the building of the golden calf, of the Egel Azov, somehow the Jewish people get by that. The Ribono Shel Olam says, B'yom pokti, pokaditi, on the day that I will collect. So I'll collect, but it doesn't arrest the progress of the Jewish people. It doesn't say you're not going to go to the land of Israel. And it doesn't say that this generation is going to be destroyed. However, when it comes, so in the Chumash Bamidbar, we find the Jewish people face war. They're going to the land of Israel. The old generation has died out because of the sin of the Meraglim, of saying evil about the land of Israel. The land of Israel is a very sensitive place. It resents being criticized. And a fact that is unfortunately lost on most people who live in the land of Israel. Because of that, therefore, that generation dies as not going to the land of Israel. Their children and grandchildren, however, are going. So one would think that if we're going to the land of Israel and God is taking us there, and we've lived under so many miracles in the whole 40 years in the desert, that conquering the land of Israel would be a cakewalk. There would be nothing to it, you know. We'd march in, and the other nations would march out, and that somehow it would just all work out. Don't forget, then leaving the land of Egypt, Bnei Yisrael yotzim biyod ramah, the Jewish people go out openly, easily. And here, on the entrance to the land of Israel, they are faced with a series of wars, one war after another. The Amaleki make a war, the Canaani make a war, Sichon makes a war, Og makes a war, and the Jewish people have to fight. They have to have an army, they have to go in battle. But war alone does not deter the Jewish people. If anything, we are engaged here in a century-long war here in the land of Israel. The war really has not deterred us. It's not pleasant. We would prefer that it doesn't happen. But because of the war, the movement to the land of Israel has not stopped. It continues. So then a different tactic is used to prevent the Jewish people from accomplishing their goal. And the different tactic is they hire, Balak hires Bilam. Bilam is the master public relations man of his time. He's a hired gun. You want people cursed, I'll curse them. He is today what we call investigative reporting. Bilam, you know, he's CNN, he's BBC. He has his agenda. And since Bilam comes with very heavy credentials, you see that before Bilam begins to speak, he introduces himself. Nu magever shesumayin, nofel glue noim. The great Bilam, you know, he lists all of his degrees and his credits. So Bilam wants to curse the Jewish people. He's hired for that purpose. He's hired to conduct the media campaign against the Jewish people. That's in effect what Bilam is. It always said that it's a good thing that God doesn't read the New York Times every day. So the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't agree. He doesn't agree that Bilam should be able to do that, in spite of Bilam's efforts. And therefore, Vayafoch Hashem es haklola livrocha. God takes Bilam's words of curse and he changes them into blessings. I always like to tell the story about the two Jewish ladies who all their lives fought with each other and cursed each other, said terrible things about each other. And then one Erev Yom Kippurim, the rabbi in town could no longer bear that this should go on, so he called them both in and he said, listen, this is not going to happen anymore. I'm not going to allow it. I want you both to give me your solemn word that when you want to speak to each other, there will be no curses, but you will only say compliments and blessings to each other. So it's Erev Yom Kippur, and the rabbis got them imprisoned there. So they have no choice, but they agree. The night after Yom Kippur, walking home from the synagogue, so one turns to the other and says, Yente, you should be blessed, but you know what I mean. So even though Bilam gives us blessings, and we're always impressed by blessings from the non-Jewish world. If the non-Jew says something nice about us, so we begin the prayer every morning, Ma tovo alecha Yaakov mishkanosecha Yisrael. We don't begin with words of David HaMelech or of Moshe Rabbeinu or of Avram Avinu. We begin with the words of Bilam. Oh, you know, the senator said a nice thing about us, right? The president, the prime minister, Terry Larson. Somebody said a nice thing about us, so that's front page news. So that Bilam's words, we win with that battle also. Somehow we survive. But the one that undoes us than that you see in the Chumash Bamidbar, is Bilam gives them the idea. He says, Elohim shel elu, the God of this people, sonei zima, he hates sexual immorality. That's the Achilles heel. That's the Schwerpunkt. That's where a battle can be won or lost. And therefore he says, I'll give you an idea, right? You know, you're paying me a big fee, I'll make it worth your while. And therefore the daughters of Midian come, and they seduce the men of Israel, and a plague breaks out. The tribe of Shimon is decimated. It never again recovers from it. Half the tribe is destroyed. The leader of the tribe, in the open act of immorality, is killed. He's impaled by Pinchas. And we find throughout the Tanakh already that the tribe of Shimon plays almost no role. They were unable to conquer their territory in the south, so part of the tribe was absorbed by Yehuda. They come up here in the north to the Galil where we are. They also are absorbed here. The remnants of the tribe of Shimon, the Gemara says, remain the poverty-stricken people of Israel. And the Gemara says teachers and scribes came from them. That's all they, you know, like those that do, and those who can't teach, right? So that's what the Gemara says about the tribe of Shimon. They're gone. Other tribes also sin, big sins. But the sin of immorality is one that corrodes and corrupts the entire social fabric. And therefore Chazal saw in this sin of sexual immorality, of a society that accepts it, a tremendous danger. And I think, if not an expert in our time, but we also face war and who face all the different bilums that exist, they will not undo us as much as the corrosive influence within our society of a permissive, licentious society. And that is a terrible danger for us. And that's been promoted by the media, naturally, which has pushed the envelope farther and farther. And then it becomes a matter of self-justification. How do you justify what really is such antisocial behavior? So then you justify it with a philosophy of freedom, freedom of choice. People can do whatever they want. Nobody has a right to tell me anything. And then it becomes not only acceptable, but then it becomes the cutting edge of civilization, the cutting edge of progress. My students in the center program at Or Sameach, where I teach, all of whom come from major college campuses, mostly in the United States, but in England as well, in South Africa, Australia. They tell me that the two leading Jewish groups on the college campuses are the Orthodox group and the gay and lesbian group. Because today, gay and lesbian means that you're progressive, even though it means that you're regressive, because we're back to Greece and Rome, which pretty much were destroyed because of such behavior. But it becomes acceptable. And the Rabbi saw in the definition of human sexuality that if one feels that the only thing that's involved is the animalistic instinct, so then perforce one contributes to the decline of society, to the corruption of that society, and that becomes a terrible weak point for the preservation of the society itself. There's a famous idea that's mentioned by the Kli Chemda. The Kli Chemda is a commentary to Chumash written by a Polish rabbi, Rabbi Meir Don Plotsky, who was a tremendous genius, a Talmudic Gaon, lived in the early part of the 20th century. He died before the Shoah. And most of the work is really a good example of Polish halachic pilpul. It's almost classic if you want to understand how the style of Torah learning, of halachic learning was in Poland. This is probably the best sefer, the best book that you can get a view on. But he has also gems scattered throughout the book of hashkafa, of Jewish attitude. So in his commentary to the first parsha in the Torah, to Breshit, so God finds Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden after the sin. So it says that they hid, vayizboshoshu, and they were embarrassed. So God said, well, where are you? So he said, well, I'm not dressed. I'm naked. Can't appear before you because I'm not dressed properly. Dress is very important, and many times dress becomes so important that it overwhelms any sense of proportion or balance. I remarked to one of the young men here that when I was in the yeshiva in Muncie, when I headed the yeshiva, so then once a young man didn't come to daven mincha. He was absent without leave. And when I saw him about 10 minutes later, I said, how come where were you for mincha, So he said, I couldn't find my hat. He couldn't find his hat, so you can't daven mincha without a hat, so therefore you don't daven mincha. So then the hat governs you, right? So I told him, I said, maybe the Lord would have accepted your prayer without a hat, right? But this way there's no prayer at all. The dress is very, very important. We have, my wife and I have a great nephew. So he was bar mitzvah last year. And so he came over our home and, we gave him a present and we had a little celebration of the fact that he becomes bar mitzvah. So he says to me, he says, Uncle Berel, he says, from tomorrow on, I put on tefillin and I only wear white shirts. So by him wearing white shirts and tefillin, they're the same. And God forbid if someday he doesn't have a white shirt. So I don't want to say the other half, but I have seen it happen. I don't know why, if somebody takes off the black coat, or even if he takes off the kippah, so then why does that end his relationship with God? But it's ingrained within us that it has to be that way. And that's what Adam said to the Ribono Shel Olam. He said, what? Ge'eram anochi. I'm naked. So Rashi there, as only Rashi can, inserts that it's not just that he was naked. Mitzvah achas oisalo, he had one mitzvah, v'nisart lo imenu, and the mitzvah disappeared. And therefore, when he said he was naked, he was stripped, it meant that he was stripped of the mitzvah. He was naked of any positive commandments. The mitzvah that he was missing was naturally that he was told not to eat from the Eitz Hadas, not to eat from the tree of knowledge. So the Meir Don and the Kli Chemda says, What does that Rashi mean that he was a mitzvah achas? He had another mitzvah. He had the mitzvah pru'urvu, the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply, the mitzvah to have a family, which was also given to him. So then why does what's the indication that because he ate from the Eitz Hadas, what happened to the other mitzvah? So he says a very, very telling comment. He said after they ate from the Eitz Hadas, pru'urvu was not a mitzvah anymore. It was just plain sex. The sartloi meant it. The whole holiness was taken from it. And then it just became an animal instinct. And an animal instinct is not a mitzvah. And therefore he said he was naked. In that idea lies the attitude of Chazal towards the entire subject. In the history of civilization, this subject, more than any other, has always been construed in extremes. The world goes in waves. It's like a pendulum. So either you're at the time of the Greeks and the Romans when everything goes, or you live in a celibate Victorian era where everything happens but it's all wrong, right, for happening. And therefore it creates customers for the psychiatrists, because of the fact that how do we deal with this thing? And so it goes in waves. So for instance, in the 1940s and even the early 1950s, in a more wholesome American civilization, so the only way to break any barriers was that in the movie Gone with the Wind, Clark Gable said the word damn. Well, I mean, that was it. That was as risque as you could get. When you think about it, that 50 years later, it's impossible almost to attend the theater because gratuitously obscenity is thrown in when it's not necessary for the plot. Sexual encounters are thrown in when it's not necessary for the plot. I have a friend of mine, a scriptwriter in Hollywood, Orthodox person, wonderful person. Robert Avrecht is his name. In fact, he's the scriptwriter for our film on the Rambam. A professional Hollywood scriptwriter, and he's also produced movies. So he produced a movie, a small movie, it only made about $15 million, so that's a small movie. About a decade ago, it was called The Stranger Amongst Us. I don't know if you ever saw it, but The Stranger Amongst Us is a story of a murder that occurs within a close-knit Hasidic community in New York. And in order to solve the murder, the New York Police Department infiltrate a woman detective. I think Meg Ryan was the one, and she, or Melanie Griffith, one of them, and I forget which of the Bali Tshuva it was, but is infiltrated into the community, and eventually through her the murder is solved, etc., etc. One of the subplots in the movie is that the son of the Rebbe and this woman have an attraction to each other. Such an attraction that she really feels that they could somehow have a life together. So in the movie as it comes out, so she kisses the Rebbe's son, and he makes no response whatsoever. And because of that, she realizes that that her fantasy, her dream, can't be realized. So he told me that the movie was done, and there was, the last rushes were finished in the editing, and the head of the studio came to see the movie. And the head of the studio said to him, well, the movie can't go out this way because we have to have that he and she should live together. That must be in the movie. And here he's used up the budget, right? I don't know how many millions of dollars. The movie is done. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of movies in Hollywood that are called in the can. They're in this big metal tin, and they're sitting on the shelf. They've never gotten distributed. And you have to have the studio to distribute it. So he sees in front of his eyes all of this investment, all of this work, and nothing's going to happen to it. And the head of the studio says this scene must go in. So he stood his ground. He stood it very strongly. And he was saved because the director of the movie was an Academy Award winner. I think it was Sidney Lumet, was an Academy Award winner and somebody that had really clout in the industry. And he told the head of the studio that including such a scene would destroy the film. It has no place in the film. It just doesn't exist. And they argued, and finally they let the film go the way it was. So he told me, he says, now that's Hollywood. You want to know what it is? That's Hollywood. To put in a gratuitous scene that doesn't have anything to do with the film itself, but it has to be in. So that's the society. That's the problem of the society. And that problem reflects on our world as well. Chazal say, "Aroeh sota b'kulkula, yazir atzmo min hayayin." So I always say that, if we would live in a normal world, and I don't know if there's ever been such a thing, all of us think that until we were 10 years old, the world was normal. But if we would live in a normal world, I'd say it regarding other matters as well. If 80, 90% of Klal Yisrael were Shomrei Shabbos, as they're supposed to be, things could happen on Shabbos that can't happen now. Because now we have to defend the Shabbos. So therefore we have to build a wall higher in order to defend it. If we were not in such a defensive mode, my father always told me that his Rabbi, Reb Shimon Shkop, told him that in the 1920s, he said, prophecy, he said, that in Eretz Yisrael there's going to be a Jewish state. And the Jewish state, he said, the trains will run on Shabbos. And we'll have to figure out how to halachically have the trains run on Shabbos. So today there's technology that it could happen. There are Shomer Shabbos Jeeps that they may even have one on this kibbutz. Because through relay systems and Malach Hashem Tzricha Lagufa and Tzorchei Rabim, all sorts of things put together, there's a Shomer Shabbos telephone that the doctors use. There's a Shomer Shabbos elevator that comes every so often. But because of the fact that the Shabbos is under siege, right? They want to open every store on Shabbos. They say that that's freedom, right? They want, let's destroy anything of the Jewish character of the state because of freedom, because I want to go shopping on the Shabbos. So therefore you have to build a wall at a Shabbos higher to protect it. And therefore we would not countenance such things. We would not think that in our wildest dreams to allow them now because of the pressures. And the same thing is true in relationships between men and women, and the way the world looks today, the way our world looks today, because it's a roe sota bikulkula. And you see what society is. You see how human sexuality has been degraded, how it's almost depraved. You hear all sorts of things about alternate lifestyles. Everything is permissible. So then, within the camp of Torah observers, the fence has been raised. So that things that 40, 50 years ago were certainly acceptable and were not frowned upon, in today's world almost no longer exist. You have, one of my bad jokes is that if we could figure out how to have a wedding without the bride, that would be the next step, right? But there's a reason for it. I don't, and that's not. I don't say that it's necessarily healthy, because it creates other problems. But the society, the behavior of the society creates reactions. And since we are well aware that Gilui Arroyos is the sin that is, so to speak, most expensive to the community, because it's anti-family. That's the basic idea here, that it's always anti-family. And because of that, so you have a glorification of infidelity, glorification of not being able to ever commit, or a necessity to commit, all of which is portrayed on the media as not only normal, but as the way to go. So on the media, you never see a, so to speak, a normal person, right? Nobody ever works. Nobody ever has money problems. And everybody's a predator, in one way or another, whether it be male or female. So in such a society, therefore, we have this defense mechanism of Yazer Atzmo Min Hayayin. So even though Chazal were not in favor of being a Nazir, of being someone that denies what is permitted by the Torah, not only permitted but encouraged, the Gemara says that Shimon HaTzadik never participated in the sacrifice of a Nazir except in one occasion. He only found one real person that he understood why he became a Nazir, but the others he absolutely had no relationship with. And in the words of the Talmud, Lo daya lecho, it's not enough. The 365 lavin in the Torah are not enough for you. You have to make more. So that's the Jewish attitude, but that attitude exists in a normal time, in a balanced time. And throughout the Jewish world, throughout our history, what preserved the Jewish people was the Jewish family, even more than anything else. Even more than study, even more than prayer, it was family. The devotion to family, the feeling of family, the fact that people wanted to see children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. When David HaMelech wanted to give a blessing, so he said, Urei vonim levonecha, to see beyond yourself. And sexual immorality is basically completely anti-family. We live in a time where the Jewish birth rate is abysmal. It's so low that we cannot reproduce ourselves, and that's even when you throw in, thank God, the large families of religious Jewry. You're still, I think, in the state of Israel, what they say, 1.8 or something like that. So that's, that's suicidal. You talk about the demographics of the demographic threat. The demographic threat is within our power to cure. But again, in an atmosphere such as this, it's not cured. In fact, it's exacerbated. So the strengthening of family and the realization of the normalcy of human sexuality and of the relationship, therefore, really is the key to the entire understanding of what the Torah wants from us. And anyone that studies the Talmud or the works of the rabbis will see that over and over again. Part of the problem in Christian society from the beginning was the fact that it thought that a celibate society was the supreme society and only saw that people should marry and have families. That was only for the common people. That's for the people who are not holy. That's for those that, so to speak, can't control themselves. But the super people, and we see the problems that the church faces today. It has always faced it, except today it's out in the open. So you have many dioceses in the United States today that are going bankrupt because of the judgments against them because of the behavior of priests against children and against others. V'chai bohem, the Torah said, you should live. Lo sheyomus bohem. But Chazal always saw things in balance. The thing in balance has to do with human behavior in this area as well. To be able to control it, that it should not control you, to be able to be strong, to be able to be disciplined, and to be able to infuse what otherwise can be an animalistic act into an act of love and holiness. That was the greatness of the Jewish people. And that's why, for instance, the act of marriage, it was called kiddushin, from the word kedusha. It was held to be a matter of holiness, doing God's will, the original mitzvah, pru'urvu milu es haaretz, to create families in order to develop human civilization and in order to make a better world for all of us.